After all, Morsi is, or professes to be, a Democrat who subscribes to global norms of democratic governance and to the institutions and mechanisms meant to defend these norms. I should add that if we think this kind of balancing act is unique to Egypt, we are wrong. Even in Tunisia, where the leaders of the Ennahda party have sought to remain aloof from regional conflicts, the pool of such conflicts and their effect on domestic politics is growing. This dynamic is partly a consequence, as it is in Egypt, of the rising influence of radical Salafists. Their political and sometimes physical attacks on mainstream Islamists are not only meant to intimidate Ennahda or Muslim Brethren leaders in Egypt into embracing a more Sharia-based system, they are also designed to discredit them by suggesting that Islamist leaders are little more than a fifth column of Western cultural or ideological influence. By increasing tensions between secular and Islamist forces, the Islamists are trying to compel Tunisians and Egyptians to choose between the West and the Muslim world. Indeed, the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Tunis and the U.S. Consulate in Benghazi, not to mention the escalating violence in the Sinai, is surely meant to accelerate this corrosive process and, in doing so, put democratically elected Arab leaders in a very difficult position. Under these trying circumstances, the challenge for the U.S. is to avoid walking into an array of traps that have been set before us, or are which likely to emerge in the coming months. To do this, the U.S. must pursue a nimble diplomacy that strikes a reasonable balance between the need to communicate firmness when Arab leaders adopt positions or take actions that we believe might exacerbate local or regional conflicts, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to engage these leaders in ways that demonstrate a real appreciation of the legitimate need to secure domestic support and credibility. Moreover, we need to recognize that left to its own devices, the architecture of regional stability upon which Washington and its regional allies had previously depended is becoming increasingly wobbly. Indeed, in the long run, democratic change in the Arab world will not succeed without a sustained effort by our leaders and policymakers to re-engage on critical regional fronts, not least of which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the Iranian-U.S. conflict as well. Thank you very much.
I'm going to let everyone speak. I made, as Ryan said last night, it's what we don't know that really gets us. And after 7 years, what I didn't know were traffic patterns in Washington. I apologize for that. But Marc's going to go, and then we're going to wrap up with Dr. Korb. And then we're going to ask them all, and I'm going to say this for the sake of time now, we're going to ask them all to focus briefly on what they think 3 priorities should be then for American diplomacy in the Middle East now, given our economic circumstances, the very diverse circumstances you're all describing out there. So go away with theory first, and then we're going to get down to hard realism, nuts and bolts, and dollars and cents. And yeah, okay, so after you go, then, Marc.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure also to see Deborah. Last time I saw her, I was having scotch in her house in Istanbul. I think I'll have to start here with just a little opening. I just recently seen Argo, a movie I quite liked. However, Larry's comments there did spark a slight historical problem with that film. There's the little introduction for those of you who've seen it, and it makes you think that the CIA was responsible for the coup against Mossadegh and the Shah coming into power. I just have to state for the record that Kermit Roosevelt really doesn't deserve that credit. The credit really goes to Ayatollahs Kashani and Babahani, which is one reason why the clerics usually don't have fond reminiscences of Mossadegh. But Larry, that was just one little fact-free moment in Larry's speech, but I'll keep going. Let's just say I think my role here is to serve as the critic. I'm not going to give a lot of theory at this moment. I will just suggest to you that, the next 4 years are more or less, I think, going to be what we've seen in the first 4 years. I don't think there's going to be all that much difference. And if you like the first 4 years, then I suspect you may like the next 4 years. If you, like me, weren't a terribly big fan of the first 4 years, you're not going to be a terribly big fan of the next 4 years. I mean, if we look, for example, let's just take a few of the countries. If we look at Syria, for example, I think the death toll, at least the death toll that you see most often in the press, is at 35,000. I think the administration is, hoping, waiting, praying that the opposition, the armed opposition, can dispatch the Assad clan in the not-too-distant future so we don't have to see the death toll go to 70,000. Now, I guarantee you the death toll can go to 70,000 and the administration will do nothing. I think it's quite clear they have no intention of intervening. Unlike the French, who may, in fact, end up supplying some arms, I don't think this time around you're not going to have someone like Sarkozy or Hollande. Who will not be as lucky as Sarkozy. He will not be able to drag the president into any type of armed intervention. It's particularly, it's not going to happen when the Obama administration actually sends senior officials to Ankara to discourage the Turks from taking a more aggressive view. You're not going to have a Libya repeat because we're going to try to ensure we preempt it. In that sense, I think the Obama administration believes in preemption. So I think Syria is probably, unless we get lucky, is going to get a lot worse. I think the ramifications of that are going to be pretty severe. Most importantly, I think it's going to superheat the Shiite-Sunni divide throughout the Middle East. And I'll make a little bet now that the Syria problem, the Syria war, is actually going to be the catalytic agent for the spread of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. If the Iranians do get the nuke, and certainly on the path that we are presently on, I think it's highly likely they will get the nuke. The Obama administration will not probably stop them. Then I guarantee you the Saudis are going to call in their chips with the Pakistanis, and we're going to start seeing the distribution of nukes on the Sunni side, which will be a regrettable outcome of this war, which could have, I think, been prevented if the United States had taken a much more aggressive role much earlier. Now let's also look at Egypt. The administration came late and awkwardly to Egypt. It came late and awkwardly in general to the whole Great Arab Revolt. I prefer to call it that than the Arab Spring. It did finally arrive, and I think the president, kept the ship from sinking. However, if you believe, as I do, and I think many others, that you do not want to see the Egyptian experiment tank, then the President and the Secretary of State need to make very strong arguments why U.S. aid is justified. And I think it is. But you can't hear them making that argument. And Egypt is going to be very, very difficult. There's beyond a shadow of a doubt the arguments that are taking place, the very important, essential arguments that are taking place in Egypt amongst the faithful, amongst the Islamists, and most importantly, are going to be very repellent and repugnant to lots of folks in the West and the United States. You are going to have folks, as already you have in Congress on both sides of the aisle, that look at these arguments, look at the statements that come out of Egypt, and they say, why do we want to give money to these folks? Well, if you believe it's a good idea, then you need to make that argument. I do not hear the administration making that argument. I think it's much more likely, and in this financial environment where basically if it's not an entitlement, you're not going to get the cash, that I think it behooves the president to actually take the bully pulpit and start making the argument. Now, it's extremely difficult for him to do that because, to be frank, the President of the United States is actually fairly uncomfortable getting into any profound discussion of Islam. Usually when he or Mr. Brennan talk about Islam, it's the type of discussion that could be replayed on Sesame Street. It's not serious. He's going to have to become a lot more serious, get a lot more down into the weeds about why you need to give money to people who basically hate us. And now I think we should, But you're going to have to make that argument. And Egypt could tank, and we do not want Egypt to tank. It's entirely possible the situation is going to get very unpleasant there, and the people who are giving money are the people who will not, who would want to see the type of Egypt develop that we would not. Most importantly, the Saudis. Secondarily, the Qataris. So we should go there. I will also say that I think that, in general, the president has been a tad bit quick in declaring the jihadism, al-Qaeda dead. We don't know that. And the subcontinent, we certainly know it's not dead. And I guarantee you that when the American troops withdraw in 2014, assuming that schedule holds, you're going to see a resurgent Taliban with its jihadist allies reassert themselves in southern Afghanistan. You're going to see the war commenced for Kabul. And I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to see drones flying anywhere from Afghanistan or Pakistan attacking anyone in the future. So the problems in the subcontinent are real. Jihadism is still alive there. We don't know what the situation is in the Arab world. I am inclined to believe that if the Great Arab Revolt continues, it is successful, and you do have the implantation of crude democratic systems throughout the Arab world, that it will deal with eventually the jihadist impulse, which is a powerful current in the mainstream of fundamentalism. But we don't know that for sure. It is entirely possible that we could see jihadist elements plant themselves throughout the Middle East and be a profound threat, and I doubt seriously whether the president is going to be able to deal with them using drones. That discussion, that whole discussion about where Islamic radicalism is, it's a very difficult discussion for senior officials to have. They don't like having it publicly. I think this administration in particular, it's stultifying. You can't really have the discussion, which is one of the reasons the president and Ambassador Rice got themselves involved in a very embarrassing narrative after the Benghazi affair, because that's the narrative they're comfortable with. But that's not the narrative that's going to help make the argument to the American people, and more importantly to individuals in Congress who can pull the purse strings for why you're going to give money to causes, to movements, and to countries that really, on many grounds, are fairly repugnant. Now, I also talk about Iran, even though it's a bit outside of the Arab world, is that because it really is the wild card here. Now, the Israelis are either going to strike by mid-June, that is the timeline that Prime Minister Netanyahu has given, or they won't. And if they don't, I don't think they're ever going to do it. One has to tactically give applause to the administration. I think they very successfully gutted Netanyahu and Barak a few months back by deploying the American intelligence community in intimate conversations with the Israeli intelligence community, and thereby took the legs out from underneath Netanyahu and Barak, who was actually much more aggressive than the prime minister in his desire to strike. We will see if the Israelis do it. I have my doubts now whether they are going to do it, but I think if Netanyahu doesn't do it, he's going to have to commit seppuku in front of the pictures of his father and his brother. Now, if they do it, it's a whole new world. And I don't think the president is quite prepared for that yet. He needs to get prepared for that. I think that his preparation has been primarily try to stop the Israelis, not to deal with the possibility that they, in fact, will strike.